In December 1944, as World War II entered its final winter, the Allied armies thought the end of their enemies was in sight. They had landed in Normandy 6 months earlier, liberated Paris, and pushed German forces back towards their homeland. Many soldiers believed the war might be over by Christmas. Instead, Hitler launched one last desperate gamble, the Ardennes Offensive, known to history as the Battle of the Bulge. For 6 weeks from December the 16th, 1944 to January the 25th, 1945, the frozen forests of Belgium and Luxembourg became one of the deadliest battlefields of the war. Almost 1.2 million men fought there, around 600,000 Americans, 55,000 British, and over 400,000 Germans. More than 185,000 were killed, wounded, or captured. For the ordinary soldier, survival often depended on luck. The fighting was brutal, the weather unforgiving, and the fear constant. If you were dropped into the Battle of the Bulge as a modern person with no training, you would not last long. You would almost certainly die instantly. Let's look at why this would happen. The German plan was audacious. Hitler wanted to smash through the thinly defended Ardennes forest, cross the River Meuse, and capture Antwerp, splitting the Allied armies in two. The Allies did not expect a major attack in this snowy, forested region. They believed it was too difficult for tanks. On the morning of the 16th of December 1944, the silence of the forest was shattered. More than 1,600 German artillery guns opened fire in the largest barrage the Western Front had ever seen. Soldiers described trees exploding into splinters, foxholes collapsing, and the ground shaking like an earthquake. For an untrained civilian, this alone would be enough to kill you instantly. A shell landing within 30 yards could shred you with shrapnel. Even if you survived, the psychological shock was overwhelming. Veterans record men curled into balls, sobbing uncontrollably, or wandering around dazed, their minds broken. The Germans then sent in tanks, infantry, and elite SS Panzer divisions. Entire American units were surrounded. The front collapsed into chaos. The Ardennes in winter was not just cold, it was deadly. Temperatures dropped to minus 20 degrees Celsius, with blizzards sweeping across the forest. Snow piled waist high, soldiers had thin uniforms, little food, and often no shelter. Frostbite and trenchfoot crippled tens of thousands. Feet swelled, turned black, and sometimes needed amputation. To keep warm, soldiers huddled together in foxholes, shallow pits dug in frozen ground. They were damp, filthy, and barely big enough to move in. If you were unlucky, your foxhole might collapse under artillery fire, burying you alive in snow and soil. For a modern civilian, suddenly dropped into this environment, you would not even make it through the night. Without proper gear, you would freeze solid. Veterans remembered picking up rifles that had frozen to the hands of dead comrades. Cold was as much an enemy as the Germans. Unlike the open battles of Normandy, the Bulge was fought in dense forests, small villages, and narrow country roads. Visibility was limited. A patrol could vanish into trees and never return. Every step carried danger. A German sniper could be hidden in a church steeple or high in the trees. One crack of a rifle, and you could be dead before you knew it. Machine guns were set up in barns or behind hedges, and they could scythe down entire squads in seconds. Also, mines littered the roads. Stepping on one would blow off your legs. American soldiers wrote in letters home about the constant sense of paranoia, never knowing when death would strike. Even battle-hardened men admitted that they jumped to every rustle in the forest. For you, the fear alone would be unbearable. Imagine walking through knee-deep snow in the dark, knowing that at any second you might be shot, blown up, or captured. Many soldiers never even saw the enemy before they died. Artillery was the greatest killer of the Battle of the Bulge. The Germans massed thousands of guns and rocket launchers, known as Nebelwerfers, which screamed like banshees when they fired. Survivors described the sound as terrifying. Soldiers would press themselves into the earth as shells whistled overhead, praying they would not be the target. A direct hit could vaporize you, a near miss could rip you apart with red-hot shrapnel. Even worse were tree bursts. In the forest, shells often exploded in the treetops, raining splinters and metal down like lethal rain. Men were shredded in their foxholes, unable to defend themselves. The random nature of artillery made it psychologically crushing. You could do everything right, dig deep, stay low, and still die instantly. For a civilian, the sheer noise alone could paralyse you with fear before the first shell even landed. The German attack depended on armoured spearheads, massive Tiger and Panther tanks rolling through villages and across frozen roads. For infantry without anti-tank weapons, these were death machines. Imagine hearing the grinding roar of treads and the squeal of steel in the darkness. A tank's 88mm gun could reduce a house to rubble in seconds. Even hiding indoors was no safety. Walls crumbled, ceilings collapsed, and fire spread through the ruins. The Americans countered with Sherman tanks, but in direct combat, the Shermans were often outgunned. Crews spoke of their vehicles bursting into flames with a single German shot. Many carried sidearms not to fight with, but to take their own lives if trapped inside a burning tank. For an ordinary person, standing in the path of a tank column would mean instant death. The weight alone, up to 60 tons, would crush you without slowing. For those captured, survival was not guaranteed. On December 17th, 1944, near to the Belgian town of Malmedy, more than 80 American prisoners of war were shot by SS troops. Though not every prisoner suffered this fate, the massacre spread terror amongst Allied ranks. Soldiers realised surrender might not save them. On the German side, captured troops faced rage from local civilians who had endured years of occupation. Some were beaten or shot before reaching prisoner camps. This created a brutal mindset: fight to the death rather than risk capture. For you, stumbling into the enemy hands in such an environment could easily end with execution. The Ardennes was not empty wilderness. It was dotted with Belgian villages and farms. Civilians were trapped in their homes as tanks rolled through streets, artillery blasted walls, and soldiers fought house to house. For many, death came without warning. A shell through the roof, a collapsed barn, or stray gunfire could wipe out entire families. Thousands fled in the snow, with nothing but their clothes on their back. Others starved when food supplies were cut off. A modern person in a battle zone like this would face the same risk, being killed in crossfire, bombarded in cellars, or frozen on the roadside. Beyond physical dangers, the Battle of the Bulge destroyed minds. Soldiers endured sleepless nights under bombardment, starvation rations, and the trauma of watching friends torn apart. Some cracked under the pressure, wandering aimlessly or refusing to leave their foxholes. Doctors at the time called it combat fatigue. Today we know it as PTSD. The constant stress could break down even the toughest of veterans. One described feeling like a hunted animal. Every sound was death. For a civilian with absolutely no training, the shock of this environment would be overwhelming. You might freeze, be unable to move, and in war, hesitation can be fatal. Despite the initial German successes, the offensive did stall. Fuel shortages crippled the tanks, Allied air power returned once the weather had cleared, and stubborn American resistance in towns like Bastogne delayed the advance. The US 101st Airborne Division, surrounded at Bastogne, held out against repeated assaults. General Anthony McAuliffe famously replied nuts to the German surrender demand. Reinforcements under General Patton eventually broke through, turning the tide. By late January 1945, the Allies had regained the lost ground, but the cost was horrific. Over 19,000 Americans killed, 47,500 wounded, and 23,000 missing. German losses were even higher. The Ardennes was littered with corpses, men frozen in the snow where they fell. The Battle of the Bulge was a perfect storm of danger. Artillery barrages that killed without warning, freezing temperatures that could stop your heart overnight, tanks and machine guns that destroyed anything in their path, snipers, mines and ambushes lurking in every shadow, starvation and exhaustion that sapped strength until collapse, fear, paranoia and psychological trauma that broke even trained soldiers. For the untrained, unarmed modern person, there would be no chance. You would likely die within minutes, blown apart by a shell, shot by a sniper, or frozen in the snow. Even if you somehow survived the physical dangers, the mental strain would destroy you. The soldiers who fought there endured unimaginable horrors. Many never spoke of it again after the war. They were not superhuman, but they had training, comradeship and discipline. Without those, the Ardennes was a death trap. The Battle of the Bulge was Germany's last gamble in the West, and one of the most brutal battles of World War II. It showed the extremes of human endurance and the depths that suffering soldiers could endure. For the men who fought, survival often came down to sheer luck. For us today it serves as a reminder: war is not glorious, but terrifying, random and merciless. The conditions faced in the Ardennes were so deadly that an ordinary person would not survive a single day. You would instantly die in the Battle of the Bulge, not because you lacked courage, but because the battlefield itself was designed to kill. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.